Here come the dogs. Oh, there's Ike. There's Zelda. They've come for Tag Tuesday. Let's do this! 3 tags today! I was tagged 3 times last week, so I'm doing one of my combo tag videos. I'll do 3 tags today. I'm doing the 80s tag, I'm doing the Cull Ya Books tag, and I'm doing the shopping trip cart tag. I probably should remember the name of that better. Created by Jason over at Byways and Booklands. It's tagged to do the 80s tag by Book Nerd TV, and tagged to do the Cull Ya Books tag by Sean the Book Maniac. Thanks everybody for the tags. Ike, please don't be so sad. So here we go. The first tag is the 80s tag, and you know, as a child of the 80s myself, I have to tell you, I remember the 80s fondly. That's a lie. I don't. I happen to think the 80s were a terrible decade. Ike, it's okay, buddy. So does Ike. And particularly a bad decade for music and color, fashion sense. So here we go. The 80s. The 80s tag. Prompt number 1, Cyndi Lauper, True Colors, a book that represents the true you. So I tried to find a book that I thought represented who I was the best. It's a book I've mentioned on my channel before, and that's The Great War in Modern Memory. The reason why I think this book represents me the best is that it combines my love of 2 things. One is history and the other is literature, and on top of that, it combines some of my favorite literature and one of my favorite historical events to read about. That's World War I and World War I writers and the aftermath of World War I in terms of literature. So for me, The Great War in Modern Memory by Paul Fussell is probably the book that represents me the best. Prompt 2, REO Speedwagon, Keep On Lovin You. I think I might have done a slow dance with my wife to that in 1986. Anyway, so choose a favorite book, your favorite book from the 80s, or a favorite book from the 80s. And I thought this time I would choose a book I know I haven't talked about on my channel before, and that book is In Country by Bobby Ann Mason. This is basically the story of a young girl coming to grips with the death of her father in Vietnam, her relationship with her uncle and her grandmother, and a trip to the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. It was made into a movie, which, you know, this won't be the last time I'm probably upset Steve Donahue in this video, but I didn't think the movie was anywhere near as good as the book. This is just a good book about from the 80s, I think, because one of the things that's difficult to remember now and that younger people would have no reason to know is how much Vietnam loomed over American culture in the 80s. There are all kinds of movies about Vietnam, Full Metal Jacket, Platoon, etc. All kinds of books written in the 80s by Vietnam veterans, and Vietnam was a major cultural influence, I think, on the 1980s in terms of the creative arts. So I chose Bobby Ann Mason's In Country, which I thought was a good, enjoyable book. Prompt number 3 is Aretha Franklin and George Michael, Knew You Were Waiting. I have to be honest with you, this is the only song on the list I couldn't call to mind in my head, so that made it different. But the prompt is to pick a book published in the 80s you still want to read. Hello, Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum is that book. I have tried to read this book several times. Jason Harrigan over at Byways and Bookland has, of course, you know, scheduled his possible read-along of this book for July, when I'm probably too busy, but I might slip it in there anyway, because this is definitely a book from the 80s I want to read, and I believe this was published sometime mid to late 80s. Prompt number 4, Whitesnake, Here I Go Again. I definitely remember this song from the 1980s, even though it's not my favorite Whitesnake song, and yes, I have a favorite Whitesnake song, and it's called Slow and Easy, which, you know, is a lot dirtier than I thought it was in the 1980s. Anyway, so Here I Go Again, a book or a series or new release you are anticipating. That would be the next book in the Highway 59 mystery series by Attica Locke. I read the first 2, Bluebird, Bluebird, Heaven My Home. I really like them. They are set in an area of the world in which I grew up. I think these books are really good and enjoyable. I may rate them a little higher because I recognize the people, the places where they're set, but I'm really looking forward to the next one of these books by Attica Locke. Let's see. Prompt number 5, Dead or Alive, You Spin Me Right Round. if I were to mention, 80s music that was bad, that would definitely be on my list. But anyway, a book you want to read again, that would be Jane Eyre. I don't actually have a copy of Jane Eyre here to hold up and show you, but I'm going to reread Jane Eyre. I'm going to reread Jane Eyre this year as a part of October. Last year I reread Wuthering Heights. That didn't go particularly well for my opinion of Wuthering Heights. But there you go. I'm going to reread Jane Eyre and hope that I find that I like it better as a more mature person. Prompt number 6, Michael Jackson, Billie Jean. Ike, it's okay. I won't be talking about 80s music forever. Come lay down. Come on, Ike, come lay down. It's okay. You don't have to cry the whole time. Nothing's happening. Oh yeah, so Michael Jackson, Billie Jean, a book recommended that you really didn't like. Zelda, you don't have to get all the attention all the time. So a book recommended to you that you really didn't like. I'm going to go with 10th of December, a collection of short stories by George Saunders. Saunders famously probably more famous now for publishing the novel Lincoln and the Bardo, which I really liked. Was in the beginning really considered a short story writer, and this was supposed to be one of his really great collections. And I have to be honest with you, there are very few stories in this collection I liked. It was recommended to me by a number of people, and it just really didn't work for me. Prompt number 7, Van Halen Jump, the album where Van Halen introduced keyboards, which, I blame the keyboards for the breakup of the original lineup with David Lee Roth. Even though I like the Sammy Hagar Van Halen, I think it's really, really underrated in lots of ways. Sammy Hagar is a much better vocalist than David Lee Roth, even if he wasn't as, acrobatic. Anyway, back to the topic. Van Halen Jump, a book that scared you or surprised you. Well, I'm going to ignore the scared part. I don't read a lot of horror fiction, and so, I don't get a lot of kind of I don't get scared when I read a lot just because I don't read those kind of books. But surprised me is Leonard and Hungry Paul by Ronan Hession, which I read because the book was listed as one of the long-listed books for the Republic of Conscience Prize. I wanted to read some of those books this year. This book surprised me just with how much I liked it. I'm certainly not saying it's a perfect book. It really surprised me how much I enjoyed it, how charming I found it. I might go back and read it at a different point in my life and it'd be different, but at the time it really was kind of a great book for me to pick up. Then prompt number 8, Heart, what about love? What do you love about BookTube? Well, obviously, it's the BookTube community. That's who I love. So to tag some people, I'm going to tag anybody who was somewhere between the ages of 13 and 25 in the 1980s. If that was you, I'm tagging you, because I'd like to see how you react to these tags and your memories of some of these songs. Okay, there was tag number 1. That was the 1980s tag. Again, thanks to Book Nerd TV for tagging me. Oh, wow, forgot to mention the original that tag was created by Lauren at Book Bubbler. I'll leave links to both Book Nerd TV and Lauren's channel down below. On to tag 2, the Cull Ya Books Tag. This tag was created by Kieran over at KD Books. I was tagged by Sean the Book Maniac. I don't know what's wrong with Ike today. I was tagged by Sean the Book Maniac to do this, and this tag is all about, essentially getting rid of books. And I hate to tell you, Kieran, I don't really get rid of books. So a lot of these questions are going to have fairly short answers, I'm afraid to tell you. But I thought that the prompts are really interesting. They bring up some kind of different things, I think, about books that we all as book people deal with and maybe don't think about as much. So here we go. Prompt number 1, what is the most recent book you've added to your shelves and why did you purchase it? That would be The House on Endless Waters by Muna Elon. This is brand new. I just got it not too long ago, and I got it because this is going to be, I'm going to be buddy reading this with Britta Bowler early this month, and hopefully I'll feel motivated to do a review because I do like doing book reviews, but it'd be great to buddy read that with Britta. So that was prompt number 1. Prompt number 2, what book did you buy with no desire to read? Now, I think I've seen several people not exactly take this maybe as the creator of the tag intended, but generally speaking, if I buy a book, I intend to read it, unless I buy a book that I already have an edition of. And so under that category would be this edition, paperback edition of Through the Wheat by Thomas Boyd, published by the University of Nebraska Press, I think sometime in the early 2000s. I really like the cover picture. Thomas Boyd is one of my World War I authors. I've mentioned several times before. A lot of research, wrote a book about him, and I have three other editions of this. So I bought this just to kind of have the latest published edition of it, and I've never actually read this edition, even though I've read Through the Wheat probably 6 or 7 times. Prompt number 3: what is the most awkwardly shaped or sized book you own? Zelda, hush. Whew, you guys wanted dogs in the video. You got dogs in my video this time. So I have a lot of awkwardly sized kind of coffee table books. I chose one. That's Baseball Legends of All Time. My wife got me this. It talks about, obviously, individual baseball players, Walter Johnson, etc. And it's kind of, it's really kind of a square book. Not perfectly square, but it's a little bit awkward. And the main problem I have is that it's so long that when I put it on the shelves, it goes too deep. I think like a lot of book hoarders, like, well, me, I have double stacked books, so behind the books you see, there are usually at least a few books that kind of would belong in that section I don't have room for, that I stack behind, and this one's too deep to go in there. So that would be kind of my awkwardly shaped book. Prompt number 4, show and tell. How do you arrange your books? You see my books behind me. Not really a bookshelf tour person. I did one video in which I showed myself rearranging my books, but to be honest with you, bookshelf tours are not, I think like Sean said, not my favorite videos, and so I really don't want to make them, but I'll just say that I organize my books alphabetically by subject. The arrangement of the subject doesn't make any sense. So on the top left corner I have classics, then I have poetry, then somewhere near the top right corner of the shelf behind me begin the novels. The novels go all the way down to the bottom shelf. On the bottom shelf I have books over world history topics, including some World War I books that are not strictly speaking American. And then on the shelves over here on my left is where I primarily have my nonfiction, starting with biographies on the top, American history books on the next shelf and a half or so. Then I have short stories, fantasy, and then I have detective novels and spy novels on the bottom, and they're arranged alphabetically by author when I can remember to put the books back where they go. Prompt number 6, how do you decide if you're going to keep or give away a book? I usually decide if I'm going to keep a book when I buy it. I buy books to read, I buy books to keep, you know. I know a lot of people see this as kind of the acquisitive, you know, culture of BookTube, and that's fine. I really don't care. I like the books. I like keeping books. I like having books on the shelf. I like being reminded of the books I've had. So generally speaking, if I buy a book, I intend to keep it. There are some exceptions, and I will say the BookTube prize is kind of challenging that notion. There'll be some BookTube prize books I'll get rid of. I can think one specifically. But I generally speaking, I don't give books away. Prompt number 7, what is a contender for the oldest book you haven't read on your shelves? I think this is probably not the oldest, but it's the oldest I could find quickly, and since it was a hardback, it seemed like it was the most egregious purchase I had that I hadn't read, and that's Samuel Beckett's Dream of Fair to Middling Women. If I remember correctly, this is Beckett's first and unpublished novel, which was published in 1992, which means I've had it now for 28 years, and I'm not sure I've ever read the first page of the book. So that would be probably the oldest book I have that's unread, at least as a hardback. Prompt number 8, what book on your shelf have you read would you struggle to explain and then try? Well, you know, nothing says confusion like Samuel Beckett, so this slim kind of prose piece by Beckett called Company is a book I read early on when I was trying to really get into Beckett, not necessarily successfully. That's not his fault necessarily, but maybe mine. And this book is confusing. From what I can tell, it's either a man in a completely darkened area who is visited at least by the voices of people from his past, and he tries to reconcile in his head what's happened, or it's just a story of a consciousness existing independent, maybe, of I don't know. Anyway, so there you go. That was my attempt to explain Company by Beckett. Prompt number 9, which book would you never ever give away? I've shown that book before and I forgot to bring it in here. I have a first edition, second printing of Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez that still has the kind of cool little postcard that came with it that my wife gave me way back when the book was first published in the 80s, back before she was my wife and when she was my girlfriend, and that would be a book I would never give away. Let's see, prompt 10, out of all the books you mentioned, what's the one book you would give away and to who? I would love to give this copy. I would probably give this copy of Company by Samuel Beckett to Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics. On the off chance he hasn't read it, Alan spent time studying theater and literature in Ireland, and I'm pretty sure he knows a lot about Beckett, so maybe he'd understand this better than me and can explain it to me. Let's see, then, yeah. I'm sure there's a prompt on here to tag people to do the Cull Ya Books tag, so I'm going to tag just a few people, and you know, since Sean got to this first, he tagged several people, so I'm going to tag Kelly from books I'm not reading primarily, because I want to see Kelly do another tag, and she and her husband Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse are doing a thing where they only read books that they already have, and I have a feeling that will lead them to make some decisions, perhaps about culling some books. So I'm going to tag Kelly. I think I tagged Jason in the last tag video or in another tag video I did last week, so I'm going to give him a break from that one. I also want to tag Doris and her Tower of Doom TBR in her window. Doris has to cull books, and so I'd like to be able to see her reaction to this. Sorry if I'm double tagging you there, Doris. And then who else would I tag? I'm going to tag Hannah from Hannah's Books. Hannah, I know I tag you a lot, I'm sorry. But you make really interesting videos, and everybody likes to hear the sound of your voice because it's so soothing and calm. So I'm going to tag you. I'm going to tag Alan Braswell. That's the name of his channel. I'm going to tag Alan to see what he does about culling books. So there you go. There's the Cull Ya Book tag. Thank you, Sean, for tagging me, and thank you, Kieran, for creating that tag with some really interesting and fun questions. Okay, so this is my third attempt to do this tag. It is the supermarket shopping book tag created by Jason over at Byways in Bookland. He created this tag. He tagged me in the original. I appreciate that. There are some interesting questions here kind of relating grocery shopping to books, which has led me to come up with maybe some answers, a few answers that are not standard on my channel. So prompt number 1 is just simply a question list. Before going book shopping, do you have a list? And the answer is yes. I rarely go book shopping online, or back when we could go to physical bookstores or I felt comfortable doing so. Going to physical bookstores, I usually have books that I'm looking for. That doesn't prevent me from picking up the odd, book that I wasn't looking for. And the serendipitous find, and for searching the shelves. By the way, that's exactly how I go to the grocery store. I go to the grocery store for a few things, end up coming back with a lot more. Prompt number 2 is fruit and veg. Good for body and mind, a book you felt improved your mental and physical health. So a book that I think improved my mental health is The Tao of Pooh. This relates, or The Tao of Pooh, this relates Taoism to Winnie the Pooh characters. And this probably helped me the most by convincing me that I didn't want to be an Eeyore. I have to tell you, Eeyore is my favorite Pooh character. I just kind of love his sadness, which sounds awful because, clearly Eeyore is suffering from some kind of depression and angst, and I just decided, the way the way Eeyore is described here isn't really a person I want to be thought of as. So that probably helped me break out of my Eeyore phase a little bit. Not that I had depression like Eeyore and I just overcame it because of this book, but it got me to think more positively, let's just say, about life. Prompt number 3 is 10 goods. The contents are often bland. What is your 10 canned or 10 to food genre? And this was kind of required me to do some extra thinking because I don't read, as I have a project this year, proving I don't read across a lot of genres. But if I was just going to go for books that are bland, I would go for these kind of concise or short histories of some specific thing. This one is Medicine in America. And these books are written by real, professional historians to kind of give an overview of a big subject or a subject that lasts over a long period of time to just academic readers. I have a feeling that they are assigned as kind of general texts in classes. And they vary greatly in quality, but because they're trying to cover a big subject in a relatively short book, they do have a tendency to be bland. And I'm not sure the authors of these books necessarily go into them with the thought, I'm going to write a really interesting book. Having said that, these are useful books. As a teacher of history at both the high school and the college level, oftentimes one of the things that I think has enriched my classroom and the information in my class is having read these books, because it's a good, quick way to ground myself in some of the basics of subjects which, I never studied, but they do have a tendency to be bland. Prop number 4, meat and fish prepared by a skilled butcher or fishmonger just for you. What's a book you feel was written for you? This was tough. To be honest with you, I have a tendency to not think books were written just for me. And the ones that were, I think I may have actually mentioned in Tag today already. So I went with a different one, and this is a book that I reviewed in February called You Never Forget Your First, a biography of George Washington by Alexis Coe. And the reason why I say this book was written specifically for me is that George Washington is my favorite president. Please don't at me. Again, I'm aware of the many flaws of George Washington. You can't find an unflawed founding father. I'm sorry, you can't find an unflawed president. And maybe Washington has more flaws than others. Maybe he's overrated. I don't care. He's my favorite. And this book then kind of exactly fit me, because Alexis Coe seems to see George Washington as kind of her favorite. And not only is this a biography of Washington, which, by the way, is not hagiography. She points out the many flaws in Washington, and oftentimes episodes that are less well known about flaws in Washington's character, but she also pokes a lot of fun at the larger historical establishment, which writes incredibly long biographies, almost worshipful biographies of George Washington. And it was fun. It was historical, it was accurate, it was about George Washington, it was fun. There you go. It felt like that book might have been written just for me. Prop number 5 is baked goods. Bread is a staple. Who is an author that you could digest any time of day, any time of the year? Surely you know the answer to that question. If not, look at my avatar picture, because obviously it's Balzac. Can't wait to pick up a Balzac novel sometime this summer and get back to my reading, because I just love Balzac. He's my favorite, at least my favorite 19th century writer, if not my favorite writer of all time. Prompt number 6 is chilled. Recommend a cool new author. Well, other than Alexis Coe as a historian, and then Royden Hession, the author of Leonard and Hungry Paul I mentioned earlier in an earlier tag in this video, I'm going to pick a new to me author, and that's Octavia E. Butler. This year in February I read her novel Kindred, which is about time travel, an African-American woman back to the times of slavery in pre-Civil War Maryland, and I really thought this was really good. So I'm excited. She's a new to me author, which I would highly recommend if you haven't read her before. Prompt 7, Frozen section, a book that gave you chills. I'm going to go, I mentioned this before, I don't read a lot of horror fiction, and so there aren't a lot of books that give me chills because I just don't read that kind of fiction. I don't know why, and that is, horror is one of the genres I want to make sure I read this year. But I chose The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. Erik Larson, popular historian, good at the narrative. This is maybe his most famous book. I can't remember, but basically it's a book about the, 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, and about a serial killer in Chicago who's now famous thanks to this book, whose name I just forgot. Goodness gracious. My memory, I'll tell you what. whose name I just forgot. Anyway, who sets up a murder house in Chicago so that he can kill people by asphyxiating them and watching them die. That is a chilling thought to me, that someone is so damaged, so twisted that they would go to all that trouble and be able to get away with it. So that was the book I said gave me chills. Number 8 is Beer, Wine, Spirits, the first book that made you feel like an adult. I don't have a copy of these books because they belong to my dad, but they would be the first book in Bruce Catton's Civil War trilogy, which I believe is called The Coming Fury. My dad's a huge Civil War history buff, and for a short time he was a history teacher, and he read a lot of books by Bruce Catton when I was young, and I remember getting this book off the shelf, asking my dad if I could read it, and him, as my parents always did, saying yes, because they had a policy I could read any book I wanted to that was on their shelf. And I remember going to my room, and I remember reading the book. I don't think I got a lot out of it, but definitely made me feel like an adult to read a work of actual professional history on the Civil War. Prompt number 9 is Sweet Candy. What author is your indulgence or a little treat? This is kind of a new to me author too, and I have Steve Donahue, one of his many book openings, book unboxing, mail haul things he did. Publisher, I guess Penguin Classics, had begun sending him these paperback copies of the Maigret detective novels by Georges Simenon. And so I picked up 2, and I enjoyed both of them. I love detective fiction. That's the genre of fiction I'm most likely to go to just when I need a break and want something I just purely enjoy. These are perfect. They're relatively short. The mysteries are not necessarily all that involved, and Maigret is a great example of a working police detective character. So, you know, they're just kind of that perfect thing. Just like a little treat at the end of the day. Prompt number 10 is Magazine Stand. If you read magazines or journals, which ones do you read? I'll be honest with you, I don't currently subscribe to or regularly go someplace where I could pick up magazines and journals, but I am thinking about renewing my subscription to 2 of these 3 magazines, and that would be the Atlantic and the New Yorker. I had a subscription to the New Yorker for years, but when my kids were young, having the time to read and work on my own projects and do all the activities my kids did meant that there was no way I could read a magazine like the New Yorker in a week. So I just fell behind. I just had stacks of unread New Yorkers, which just felt wasteful. I did subscribe to the Atlantic for a while, and I would like to do that again because I think a lot of their political reporting and essays are excellent right now. And then the other magazine I used to have a subscription to, which I would love to have a subscription to again, is Field and Stream. You know, me for the fishing, but there are always, I think, really well-written pieces of nature writing focusing on fishing and hunting, obviously, but also in the outdoors and Field and Stream. So those would be the 3 magazines. Then, let's see, number 11 is the checkout to tag some people. So let's see, who do I want to tag for this one? You know what, I'm going to tag the fellas over at the Codex Cantina. I'm going to tag Leo from A Little Book Life. Ooh, I'm going to tag Alan Morton from the Book Traveler. I don't think he's done this yet. So there you go. Those are my 3 tags. I don't know if Jason tagged any of you, but Alan Morton, Codex Cantina, and Leo from A Little Book Life, I'm tagging you to do the supermarket book cart or book tag. There you go. Thanks to everybody for tagging me. Obviously, I'll leave a link to Jason's original tag video in the comment section down below. So hopefully you enjoyed one or all of these tags. Let me know in the comment section what you thought. As always, thank you for watching.